Okay, uh, let's get started. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get started. So last week we had covered a little bit of uh, why we need mathematical modeling and systems biology, and how do we represent those things, and how do we go about those things. Today we'll talk a little bit more about graph theory and the topics that has been covered in this week's part. So let's get started. So, first is the types of graphs. We have a lot of types of graphs, but like I have listed down a few of them, the ones that will be coming across more than the others. So first we have undirected graphs. I'm hoping everyone knows what it is. So there are only single connections between a pair of node, and that is not directional. So that's the undirected graph. Example of that is a gene co-expression network. Any kind of any kind of basically a gene co-expression network is a undirected graph. Or more intuitively, you can think of something like LinkedIn uh, is an undirected graph, but Facebook will be a directed graph. So uh, coming to directed graphs, there the edges are represented by rows indicating the direction, and examples of these includes pathways, biological relationships. This SBGN standards includes the standards that we talked about last time about how to represent nodes and edges in biological networks. So basically, pathways and other biological networks are quite good examples of directed graphs. So you can have uh, one gene giving out a protein, giving out basically regulating another gene, but the opposite may or may not be true. Just a second. Yeah. Okay. So next comes weighted graphs. So here the ages are associated with the with some sort of weight. So that can be relative, that can be an absolute value, but there is some sort of weight on the edges that are connecting two nodes, and it represents the relevance of the connection, as in how strong is it or how weak is it. It represents that. So an example of that is a sequence similarity network. So uh, goes undirected, directed, and weighted graphs. After that comes the bipartite graphs. So bipartite graphs uh, have basically they are basically undirected graphs. Their vertices can be partitioned into like two sets. Basically, they have two sets of vertices, two distinct uh, types of vertices, and edges exist between the two different types of vertices, but they do not exist between a single type. So basically, if you have two sets V prime and double prime, so edges will exist between V prime and V double prime, but not within V prime or within V double prime. So example of this is a gene disease network. So your edges will go from your one set of nodes will be genes, your other set of nodes will be diseases, and your edges will go from genes to diseases or diseases to genes, whichever suits. But it will not be found in like within the gene set or within the disease set. So that's a good example for a bipartite graph. So next comes multi-edge graphs. So multi-edge graphs contain multiple parallel edges between the two same vertices. Actually, we'll see some representation of these different types of graphs in the next slide. I'm just trying to like note down all the definitions for you guys. So yeah, so we have multi-edge graphs, then we have hypergraphs. So hypergraphs are consisting of vertices and hyperedges. So basically, hyperedges are edges that do not necessarily originate from a node. It may originate from an edge. An example we'll see in the next slide. And after that comes tree. A very good example for hypergraphs is a biochemical network. So if you can imagine reactions that are represented on biochemical network. So you can have, say, A is giving B, but some intermediate form inside the reaction is giving rise to something else. So your edge, one edge goes from A to B node, and another edge starts from the edge between A and B and goes to another node. So those kind of relationships are well documented with the help of hypergraphs, which includes biochemical networks. Just a second. Okay. So next comes trees. Trees are undirected graphs with a single path between any two vertices, and uh, like major tree structures are connected acyclic and undirected. So we'll see how those look like, but major examples are ontologies and phylogenies. So we have different kind of ontologies for different kind of biological systems. We have tissue ontology, we have cell ontology. So if you guys go and look into any kind of ontological database, say from EMBL, you have the Brenda tissue database. So there you see the issues are hierarchically ordered with ontology. So this hierarchical clustering, this takes a tree form of a graph. So these kind of trees are very important this kind of graphs are very important in representing hierarchical networks. And uh, we'll talk about clique and connectivity in the next slides. So let's move on to the next one. So here are a few examples of the types of graphs I was talking about. So start from D. So D is a undirected graph. As you can see, no direction to the edges. On the other hand, E is a directed graph. So you have direction on the edges originating from nodes and ending to nodes. And then this is a semantic graph. This I have not talked about, but basically these are graphs which has structured information within the edges as well. So basically you can see in this graph, this graph basically spells out the sentence. So these edges are representing different parts of the sentence. So basically you have a graph, but the edges have uh, a lot of information on that graph. So it's not exactly a directed or an undirected or a weighted graph. It has it has some sort of information, not necessarily weights. So that kind of graphs are called semantic graphs. So basically these are flow charts that we use. So those you could classify as semantic graphs. Next comes our weighted graphs, the ones that we talked about. So we'll have different types of weights on different nodes. So uh, basically, the thickness of the edges represent how much weight that edge is carrying. So here you can see the point one uh, weighted edge is much thinner than the one weighted edge. So basically, these are directed graphs, and after that, we have mixed graphs. So you have both directed and undirected components in the graph. So you have some edges are directed, some edges are not directed. So those are known as mixed graphs. And bipartite graphs, as I talked about, so there are two sets of nodes. So here you can see there are distinct two sets of nodes. One set is this 1 2 3, next set is 4 5 6 7, and edges do not exist between the sets. So basically, in the first set, the edges do not exist between 1, 2, and 3. Similarly, in the second set, edges do not exist between 4, 5, 6, and 7. But edges exist between the two sets. So 1 and 4 you see connections. 1 and 7 you see connections. So basically, within the set there is no connections, but set to set there is a connection. So these kind of graphs are known as bipartite graphs. We talked about. And these are multi-edge graphs, so there can be like multiple edges connecting two nodes, and those edges can mean different things. So they can be they can be directed, they can be weighted, they can mean other things as well. So in multi-edge graphs you have basically multiple edges connecting two nodes, and those edges may mean whatever the graph is representing. So the next one is a hypergraph. So this K is a hypergraph, the ones I was talking about. So basically, you have an edge originating, and not an edge here, in this case three edges originating from another edge. So yeah, this is very reminiscent of a biochemical reaction network. So you have two basically two your substrate and your product, and the intermediate gives rise to say three more products, three different other products in another cycle. So basically, I'm not sure if you guys have studied about Krebs cycle and glycolysis. So these are cycles that have intermediate products which are used up on with in different other cycles as well. So those kind of examples are well represented using hypergraphs. And uh, this L is basically a tree graph. So it shows some sort of hierarchical clustering in the nodes. So basically, your the lowest leaves are your 4, 5, 6, 7. Your upper the nodes that are above that are in a better hierarchical position than the leaf nodes, and the root node on top of that has the highest hierarchical position. So these kind of graph structures are actually made if you study a little bit more about you know, actually genome assembly and basically algorithms that help do alignment, genome alignment. So there these kind of tree structures are used to actually break down the string sequence of a DNA into small k-mers and indexing them. So these kind of uh, uh, techniques are used in genome assembly alignment, this kind of stuff, and you'll find tree structures like this very commonly used in those kind of algorithms and representations. So yeah, okay. Uh, so basically, we'll talk about cliques and clusters in the next few slides. So I'll, I'll I'll skip both M and N, but we'll talk about cliques and clusters in the next few slides. Okay. So moving on. Just a second. Someone. Okay. We'll talk about some network parameters. I have tried to cover maximum of the parameters that are required. I might have left out a few, but like I suggest you all of you to like focus on these parameters, because the thing is when you start study graph theory, or if you study any kind of networks, these kinds of parameters are the basically are your stepping stones for understanding how the network is working. So if you have sorry huh. So if you're studying any kind of network, these network parameters will help you understand the network better. So uh, understanding these concepts are important, so I'll suggest you to focus on these parts a little bit, uh, and if you have any issues, like please feel free to ask. So first comes connectivity, or the degree of a node. So and also like in the video lectures covered which network parameter is for node, which network parameter is for the whole network. So I'll not be covering that, but that part is important. I'll suggest you focus on that as well. So yeah, next is basically we are talking about connectivity, or the degree of a node. So basically, a node's fundamental attribute is its degree. So how with how many more nodes is it connected? That's the fundamental meaning of a degree. So in case of directed network, the degree will comprise of two parts. That is, one is the in degree, the number of nodes coming into that, number of edges that are coming into that node, and there's the out degree, the number of uh, edges that are going out of that node. So together, you sum up that in degree and out degree to get the total degree of the node. So basically, uh, here, as you can see in this graph, this is an undirected graph. So one, the first node has two edges. The degree of it is two. Okay, the second node will have three edges connected. So the degree is three. Similarly with the third and the fourth node. Just a second. Somebody is. Okay. So basically, mm, huh, your third node will have 2 degrees, and your fourth node has 1 degree. So basically, the number of links, meaning number of connections between the nodes, is given by L, which is 1 by half times the summation of the degrees of all the nodes. Um, okay. So the average degree is given by basically summing up all the degrees of the nodes and divided by L. So if you sum up all these degrees, you'll get 2L. Basically, that is a representation here, 2L by N. Similarly, with directed networks, you have to calculate the in degree and out degree separately. So that is what has been done here. So the in degree of one and the out degree of one has been calculated separately. Similarly for two and three. So the total degree is just adding up these in degrees and out degrees, and the total number of links will just be, it will be this half will be gone because these are directed networks. So there is like the one connect A to B connection does not imply B to A connection. So that due to that thing, one edge represent one connection in directed network. So basically, that is where the this half is going off. So the average degree in comparison to the undirected network will be L by N. Sorry. Uh, Moving on. So uh, I think sir talked a little bit about what does these matrices, the adjacency matrices, square and cubing gives you. Um, we will come back to this if at the end there is time. I'm just skipping this because this I want to discuss a little bit more on the next class, and I only have one slide for this. So I'll talk to sir as well, see how much of this part are we actually discussing. So I'll talk to him, and we'll cover this in the next class. So just skipping this part, but sir, if you remember. There's one video in which sir has covered this a little bit. So what does a square gives? What does a to the power L give? So basically, we'll cover this in the next class after I discuss with sir. Okay. So next parameter that we are coming to is the degree distribution. So in a network, the degree of a node is the number of neighbors that it has. That is the number of nodes it is connected to by an edge. So basically, how we define degree or connectivity. And the degree distribution of this network is the number of nodes having degree d for each possible value of 1, 2, 3. So basically, excuse me. So basically, you'll have uh, the degree distribution gives the number of nodes having degree d for each possible value. So uh, from the degree distribution, you can get how many number of nodes have degree of 3 or 4 or whatever the value you're looking for. So uh, for example, in this figure, this is a degree distribution of the Saccharomyces cerevisiae gene regulatory network. So as you can see, the degree distribution of this network looks like a power law network. We'll talk about power law network in a little bit, but basically you have higher number of uh, higher number of nodes having lower degrees. So basically, you have the number of nodes having low degrees is higher, and the number of nodes having higher degrees is lower. So basically, that is the pattern that is followed in power law networks or small world networks, even in real life networks, basically. So this is a network that is from Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and here also it is following. So, say, for example, degrees number of nodes having degree 2 is much higher than number of nodes having degrees say 10 degrees say 10 or 12 or whatever. So the higher you go up, the number the basically the degree falls. So Uh, this gives out somewhat of a Poisson distribution. We'll talk about that as well. So basically, yeah, in these networks, most nodes have a small number of connections, except for a few nodes which have very high connectivity. Uh, this is the kind of characteristic that is followed in real world networks. Okay. So next is in the degree distribution only. You can get a limited snapshot of the network basically with the degree distribution. You can look at the degree distribution and you can get an idea about like which part of the networks or meaning if the network is sparse in one part or and dense in one part, or is it dense throughout, or information like this basically. How does the network look, how does the structure of the network look, information like that. Not exactly quantitatively you would get, but looking at a distribution, you can make an idea about how the network looks basically. uh, and in basic networks, these nodes typically the nodes typically exhibit similar degrees uh, as depicted in the previous plots, basically. So uh, in real, just a second, somebody is waiting. Yeah. Okay, so in real world networks, we see a diverse display of degree distributions. In such networks, the majority of the nodes remain relatively modest, with modest degrees, while a select few emerge as hubs or with significantly higher degrees, establishing connections to numerous other nodes. So you have basically most of your graph structure will be sparse, but there will be a few hubs within the structure which will be densely connected, and which will be actually the important parts of the network. So, for example, if you talk about uh, gene regulatory networks, if a part of the gene regulatory network is highly dense and having very high degree distribution compared to the other part of the network, that means that part of the network is more involved or more regulated. That the genes that are in vicinity of that part of the network are more regulated or are more involved in different things that you are wanting to study. So these kind of inferences can be made from degree distributions. And these high degree nodes are commonly known as hubs, basically, which is drawing an analogy to the transportation networks, where major hubs are known as the major points at which different transportation connections are there. So similar kind of concept is applied on graph theories as well. So this is an example network that I have given here, and this is its adjacency matrix. I would like all of you to quickly calculate the degree distributions for each of the node. Like each probability value for each of the node for the degree distribution. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. It won't be very difficult. Please write your answer in the chat. Okay, let's see. Do we have any answers? Not yet. I'll put back the diagram. Give you a couple more minutes to work this out. It isn't very difficult. Just you have to see where the connections are going from each node. So that's all. You need to calculate just that only. And divided by the total number of connections. So I want a probabilistic value. So if you can give me the degree, that will be fine as well. So, okay, let's see. No answers yet. We'll move on. But yeah, I'll just give you the answers. So basically, for this node, the first node, uh, the, the degree is 1. For the second node, the degree is 3. You can calculate each the degree of each node basically. So the first node is 1, second node is 3, third node is 1 again, fourth node is 1 again, fifth node is 2, like this up to the 10th node. So basically your total degree, uh, yeah, so basically your all the degrees you have to calculate, and you divide it by the total number of nodes. So you have 10 nodes, you divide it by the total number of nodes. And so that gives you a probabilistic value and a distribution like this. So maximum of your node, basically the maximum fraction of your nodes have degree 1. So uh, almost 40% of your nodes have degree 1. So this is how you calculate degree and degree distribution. And this is an important property that helps you understand different aspects of the network. It's a simple yet very powerful property. Okay, so moving on. Next comes the paths and distances in these networks. So I have taken the snapshot from a handout that Sir has given out only in the NPTEL course. So I urge all of you to go and read that. That is a very good source on understanding different graph theory concepts if you are not familiar with. So the two distances and the paths that I'll be talking about are the characteristic path length, which is defined as the number of edges in the shortest path length between two vertices averaged over all the vertices. It measures the typical separation between two vertices in the network. It basically represents the network's overall navigability. So basically, if you think from an adjacency matrix viewpoint, uh, you just add all the non-zero and the non-infinity values between two nodes, you get the characteristic path length. So basically, uh, it's an no, no, sorry. I was talking about the average path. The characteristic path length will be defined as the number of edges in the shortest path between these two vertices and averaged over all the vertices. So basically, yeah. Just sorry, I got confused. Yeah, in that adjacency matrix between two vertices, you average over all of the non-zero and the non-infinity values. That gives you the characteristic path length. So uh, the next parameter is the network diameter. So you have the shortest path between two nodes, the minimum number of edges that you have to cross to go from one node to another. The shortest path will be the minimum number of edges, and the network diameter will be the longest of the short paths. So basically, you have to calculate the shortest path between every uh, pair of nodes in the network, and then the the maximum of this shortest paths will give you the network diameter. It is kind of analogous to the diameter of a circle. So basically, the line connecting the two farthest points in a circle. It's the same thing here. The path connecting the two farthest nodes in a network. That is the network diameter. Uh, so uh, yeah, it can be viewed as the length of the longest shortest path in the network, and it is given by a maximum of the shortest paths. Okay, so here are the depictions of what I described. So path can be like, if you talk about a path from 1 to 2, it can be directly from 1 to 2, or it can be like 1, 2, 5, 4, then coming to 2. So path can be any path. It doesn't need to be the shortest path. But when you are talking about the shortest path, so the shortest path between 1 and 4 is 1, 2, 5, 4. This can be also the shortest path, 1, 2, 3, 4. So basically, this is also a testament to the fact that the shortest path may not be unique. So there can be multiple shortest paths from one node to another node. So the shortest path is not always unique, is what I'm trying to say. And another example is the shortest path between 1 and 5. So 1 and 5, you have this path, like, 1 to 2 and 2 to 5. This will not be the shortest path, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you have to take the shortest path. And the diameter will be uh, the path connecting the two most distant edges. So in this case, it is the longest of the shortest paths. So the longest of the shortest paths will be from 1 to 4, basically the two diametrically opposite nodes, the farthest nodes, basically. Yeah, that is the diameter of the. So moving on. Next comes clustering coefficients and cliques uh, that Sir discussed also. So basically, clustering coefficient, we'll be talking mostly in terms of undirected networks, not in terms of directed networks, but it won't like there is not much difference in terms of clustering coefficient in directed network as well. You follow a similar kind of path. So uh, the clustering coefficient of an undirected graph is a measure of the number of triangles in a graph. Now, what do you mean by triangles? So the idea of triangles, an idea of clickiness basically, is coming from the idea that if one node is connected to two other nodes, how much of the probability is that the two nodes that is connected to the original node, they are connected in itself. That is the concept of a triangle. So basically, you have a connection from A to B, you have another connection from A to C. Uh, the idea of a triangle will be if B and C are connected or not. So if you're trying to find a clique, or if you're trying to find a clustering coefficient, these kind of triangles are important. These triangles represent the smallest cliques in the network. Basically, connections between all the pair of nodes inside the network. So uh, the triangle will be the smallest clique. So you can have three nodes connected all to each other. So your clustering coefficient of the graph will be given by the number of nodes connected to that node I by divided by the number of triples centered around I. Triples is the one that I talked about. It's a set of basically triple is triple centered around node I is a set of two edges connected to node I. So number of two edges connected to a node I. Uh, you have to count all of that, and you have to use it to divide the total number of triangles inside the network. So ultimately, you're dividing the total number of cliques around that point divided by the total number of connections around that point, paired connections. So that gives you the clustering coefficient. And your clustering coefficient should be between 0 and 1. If it is 1, that means like it's a it's fully connected subgraph, so there is no more connections possible on that. So there are the, all the edges are, all the nodes are connected which were possible to be connected. It means something like that when c equal to 1, and when c equal to 0 is like you do not have a click near that node. So Yeah, that's all clustering coefficient about is about. Uh, a few points. Clustering coefficient captures the probability of neighbors of a given node I to be linked to each other. So as I talked about, A linked to B, A linked to C, how much probability is that B is linked to C? So clustering coefficient somewhat measures that probability. And local clustering coefficients of a vertex I in a graph quantifies how close the neighbors are to being a tree. That is the smallest triangle. Okay. Um, also the clustering coefficient of a graph is closely related to the transitivity of the graph, as both measure the relative frequency of triangles. Just a second, somebody is trying to enter. Okay. So moving on from clustering coefficient, we do not worry. We will do hands-on problems on all these degrees, clustering coefficient, uh, next, the centrality measures will come. We'll do some hands-on problems on this today after I finish off this lens. Okay. So next comes the closeness centrality or farness or peripherality of a node. And it is given by the sum of its distances to all other nodes, basically. So it, it is basically 1 by summation of its distances with all other nodes except itself. So where I not equal to v, you sum all the distances between that node and all other node, and you take a reciprocal. So that gives you the closeness. So if you do not take the reciprocal, it is basically the farness centrality. So for comparison purposes, we can standardize the closeness by dividing the maximum possible value, that is 1 by n minus 1. So if you want to standardize the close, you basically uh, you want to normalize this value, you can do it using 1 by n minus 1. And if there is no directed path between vertex v and I, then the total number of vertices used in the formula is used in the formula instead of the path length. So basically, if there is no path between the nodes you are trying to measure the distance between, you can use the total number of vertices instead of the path length. And the more central a node is, the lower is its distance to other nodes. So basically, if a node is situated more into the center of the graph, the more the less distance it is to other nodes, which is kind of intuitive. If you have your node in the middle of the graph, it will obviously be closer to all the nodes than if it is at one periphery of the graph. So yeah, that is kind of intuitive. And the next thing is the closeness can be regarded as a measure of how long it takes to spread information from V to other nodes sequentially. So basically, if you study biochemical networks and metabolic networks, there is something called flux in the network. You measure how much of a metabolite or how much of a reaction is getting passed on to the next node. We define that as flux, and closeness is a very important property that determines how much flux is getting transferred from one node to another. So it is an important centrality measure. It doesn't look important, but it is. Okay. Next is the betweenness centrality. So basically, in layman terms, it is uh, basically how, if a node is acting as a bridge along the shortened path between two other nodes. So it is what the name means. It is how how much a node is between uh, uh, two nodes on shortest path. So basically, you have a node, say A and B, and the shortest path from A and B is say ACB. So the C node is basically between A and B on the shortest path. So the number of times that node acts as a bridge in the shortest path, that is given as the betweenness centrality. So basically it was introduced as a measure for quantifying the control of a human on the communication, because other humans in a social between other humans in a social network by Linton Freeman. In this conception, the vertices have been having a high probability occurs on randomly chosen shortest path between two randomly chosen vertices having a high betweenness. So, and this is the mathematical formula by which the betweenness is given. So basically, you have for each pair of vertices S and T, you first compute the shortest paths between them. So uh, you compute all the shortest paths between two pairs of vertices inside the graph, basically two pairs of nodes inside the graph. And for each those pair of nodes, you have to determine the fraction of the shortest paths that pass through the vertex in question. So basically, you're connecting A and B. There can be like 15 paths connecting shortest paths, not only paths, shortest paths. There can be 15 shortest paths connecting A and B. How many of the shortest paths pass through C? That gives you the betweenness of C. And you sum this fraction over all pairs of vertices, and that is given by this sigma S not equal to V not equal to T, all belonging to the graph, is given by the delta ST of V by delta ST. So basically the delta ST is the total number of shortest paths from node S to node T, and delta ST V is the total number of paths of those paths that pass through. So basically you have, if you have 15 paths, 15 shortest paths between A and B, and say 5 of them pass through C, so the betweenness centrality of C will be 5 by 15. On that. So yeah, that is what betweenness centrality is about. Next comes random walk. So uh, this part I don't think sir has covered a lot, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit because in the later lectures also you may come up with this concepts, and also like understanding network models require, meaning like uh, if you try to implement network models, so there is always some sort of random walk that is going on inside the model. So understanding what it is important. Also, you guys have taken this as a systems biology course, so uh, in biological experimental data as well. So I was talking about genome assembly. So what happens is during genome assembly, you break each of the uh, each of the primers of the genome. Basically, you have say for short read sequencing, you have 50 base pairs long reads. So you break those reads into say smaller 10 or 15 base pair reads, and you call them k-mers. So k represents the number of base pairs in that read. So if it's a 10 or 15 base pair read, it will be a 10-mer or a 15-mer. So each of those k-mers are represented as nodes in a network, in a graph, basically. And each of those nodes are connecting to other nodes. So basically, you have all the k-mers, small k-mers connecting to each other one after the other. And you have to walk on this whole graph to get the sequence from beginning to end. So the whole idea is you have a sequence, you break it up into smaller pieces, you construct a graph on that using those small k-mers, and you have your schemas are represented on the nodes, and your edges represent connection between those schemas. And if you want to retrieve the whole sequence of the genome, you have to do a random walk. Uh, More specifically, in case of genome assembly, you do Eulerian walk, Eulerian random walk. But yeah, it's a form of random walk only. So you have to walk through the whole graph to get the whole sequence from beginning to end, because those are small connections that are represented within the graph. So, what is random walk? So, random walk is known as a stochastic or a random process. Basically, it is a random process. So, the probability of going from one node to another is based on a random process, on a random distribution. So, it is a random process that describes a path that consists of a succession of random steps on some mathematical space. So you have given a graph and a starting point. You select the neighbor of that uh, node. You have a starting point will be your node, will be some node. So you you're given a graph. You're starting at some node, and you select any neighbor of that node with some probability, obviously at random, but it will have some kind of probability. It will have some kind of distribution. So you select that and you move to the selected neighbor, and you repeat that process, and then you again move to another neighbor of that node, and then you repeat that process till a termination condition is verified. Say for example, your termination condition is like if within like 15 uh, within crossing say 15 edges, if you come back to the same node, your process will be terminated. So you can have a termination condition like this. Until the termination condition is met, the uh, you need to move from one node to its neighbor, and you need to continue to do that. And this random sequence of points selected in this way is called a random walk of the graph. It's basically what the name suggests. You are randomly walking on the graph. Just imagine yourself walking on the graph on, like, you're putting your feet on the nodes, and you're moving on from one node to another through an edge. So that is what it is, what it means basically. So I'll talk about some examples. So the termination condition that I said, feel like if you come back to the same node, you say, for example, terminate. But there are random walk models which implement kind of a restart condition. So basically, random walk with restart is a method that studies the network vicinity of a gene or protein to study their functions. This method is based on the idea that nodes related to similar functions tend to be close to each other in networks. And in other applications, random walk is exploited to model different kind of scenarios in mathematics and physics, and even like biology, obviously. So, for example, Brownian motion of dust particle or statistical mechanics. And in computer science, random walk can be used to model epidemic diffusions of information, kind of like even like not only epidemic diffusion of information, but also you can model uh, s- stuff like contact tracing for epidemics like COVID-19. So you can do that as well using random walk. So an interesting scenario that can come up is like kind of uh, so you represent each node as a person, and you represent the nodes around that node as their neighbors. So if you do contact tracing, say if you try to find out which of these say 7 neighbors this node is likely to infect, or this person is likely to infect, so that becomes somewhat of a random walk, obviously. And so we can generate random samples from a large set. We can compute aggregate functions on complex sets as well using random walk. Okay, moving on. uh, so this is a little bit more on how random walk occurs. So basically you're given a graph having v nodes and e edges, and if the graph is a connected non-part bipartite and bidirectional graph, so this basically undirected and non-bipartite, and uh, if G satisfies this condition, then the random walk converges to a unique stationary distribution with any starting point. So basically, how you do not do this random walk only once or twice to calculate the matrix. What you do is you do this for like 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 iterations. Obviously, like, you'll be using computer softwares, so you do that over like 1,000 or 2,000 times, and you average out the results. So uh, your random walk results should not be based on one random walk, because it is obviously random. So your results may be random. But if you're after 1,000 iterations, if it is converging to some value or some result, it is not random, right? So inferences from random walks are done usually using a lot of high, high number of simulations. So uh, basically, again describing that only. So when we perform random walk on G from the node V, we first move to the neighboring nodes with a probability of 1 by degree of V. Basically, the probability of moving to the node will be given by 1 by degree of V, which is quite intuitive. And then for the next node, we continue to move from it to the next node with the same probability, like we discussed. So you move to one node with a probability, and then you move to another node of its neighbor with with certain probabilities on each of the nodes. So for example, this is an example here. So here they have done say 30 iterations, and uh, like these are represented as probability. So if you start, uh, so, say for example, you're starting from node 1. So iteration 0 is your starting point. Basically, you start from node 1, and from node 1, the only options you have are node 2 or node 3. So basically, your node 2 will have 0.5 probability, node 3 will have 0.5 probability. Now, yeah, in the second iteration, then you move from node 2 and 3 to their respective neighboring nodes. So from node 2, you can either move to node 4 or node 3. Node 2, you can move to node 4 or back to node 1, or from node 3, you can move to node 1, node 4, and node 5. You are not like, if your original position is this and you're coming from here, you do not like go back to the other possibilities. So basically, if you two or three are connected, and if it's equiprobable to have in two and three, so you do not swap that. So basically, you start with a probability one here, it that gets diverges to zero point 0.5, zero point 0.5 here, and then from here you can either go back to one or go to four. Same is the case with three. You either go back to one or go to four or five. So if you calculate the probability like that, it comes out to be the node 1 probability comes out to be 0.42, node 4 comes out to be 0.42 again, and 0.17. So here you can see the calculations that is being done. Similarly, you make multiple iterations after iterations, and you see, these values converge. The probability of going into node 1 has converged. Like, see, it is getting, for the last 4 5 iterations, it's 0.17, 0.16, then 0.17, 0.17, and 0.17. So it is converging. The values are converging. The more iterations you have, the values converge better to a particular probability. And then you can say, okay, like, if you start from node 1, after your random walk, coming back to node 1, you have a 17% chance. Stuff like that. And meaning you can obviously make inferences out of that. So that is the whole idea, to get a probabilistic uh, reference on how I can move about in the graph. That is what random walk is all about. This is a very good GitHub page that talks a lot about random walks. If you want, you can check it out. I actually will put this link in the just a sec. I'll put this link in the chat. Okay. Okay. Moving on. Moving on to network models. I'll not go into very much details of network models because that is beyond the scope of of the course. But there are a lot of network models. If you are interested, you can go and read about them. They're fascinating. But I will not be able to cover a lot of those because due to the scope of the syllabus. But I have tried to include uh, as much as possible. So first is, why is the need for network models? First is, it can the models can be used to explain observed properties in real world networks, such as small world effects and power law degree distributions. Like we saw, okay, like small number of nodes will have high degrees, and higher number of nodes will have small degrees. These kind of properties can be explained using models, and can also be used to test the significance of a characteristic in a network graph. For example, evaluating whether the observed average degree is unusual or anomalous. So basically, you kind of uh, this is kind of a hypothesis testing kind of a thing. So if you check, you build different models and you check if that uh, observed average degree is at what point in the distribution is your observed degree lying? Is it towards the tail end of the distribution? If it is, then it is statistically significant. If it is not, then it is not statistically significant. It is random. So things like this can also be evaluated using network models, and also assessing factors that might predict relational ties, such as examining the presence of reciprocity or transitivity effects in the network. So basically, like, if if the network can show these properties or not, that can also be understood by network models. So in random graph theory, we consider asymptotic statistical properties of a graph for n vertices approaching infinity. So you can answer questions like what is the probability that given a G, basically graph having n nodes, small n nodes and capital N edges, what is the probability that it is completely connected? Or what is the probability that the greatest connected component should have n minus k vertices? Or what is the probability that the graph should consist exactly of n k plus 1 connected components? So stuff like this, different network parameters or different, not only this, but others as well, like centrality measures also. Like have, you can like, predict probabilistic values, probabilistic, basically probabilistic values on how uh, how relevant that property is to that graph, basically how uh, like what is the probability of having that property in the graph. So network models are basically, you can think of in silico simulations of real world networks to basically mimic those networks and study those networks, basically from basically you try to relate. So if you have a random network showing a some kind of property which is not basically you have a real world network showing some kind of property that is not being shown by a random network, so that property is important for that network. So you can draw inferences like these using network models. Okay, so moving on. So the first network model that we come across, and the most common one, is the Arch-Renyi or the ER network. So it is basically named after the mathematicians Paul Ards and Alfred Renyi. And according to this concept, a network with n vertices is created individually, including each of the potential edges with a probability p. So basically, you are uh, given a graph with having n nodes, but you are not told the number of edges. You're given a probabilistic value on like how many edges, uh, how many potential edges it can have using probability. So either it can be in the form of g of np, when n is the number of nodes and p denotes the likelihood that any two nodes would be connected, or it can be the form of g n comma n, where n is the total number of edges, m is the total number of vertices, and each potential edge in the graph is present in this model with a probability of m by n choose 2. So either of them are like both of them actually are random ER networks, and both of them actually mean the same thing. It's just that their notations and like notations are different, but essentially it's the same thing. And for each node n1 and h2 node n2 exists with a probability p, and this degree distribution is not normal. So basically we, we, we can assume, like at first glance we would think that it should be normal, but actually it is not. It is binomial. So binomial of the form basically n choose k, p to the power k 1 minus p to the power n minus k. So this is the binomial distribution form that we have. And if you basically take expectations of on both sides, you can find the expected degree of the node is basically np. Basically, if you guys have taken any statistics or random process course, so you know the expectation of a binomial distribution is np. So basically, expect from that there only the expected degree of the node will be np. Okay. Uh, for very large n, so this expression, if you take a limit n tends to infinity for a very large n, this converges to basically an exponential distribution. This is known as a Poisson's distribution. So e to the power minus np, and that n is replaced by this k within brackets. But yeah, basically e to the power minus np to the power k by k factorial. So this is a form of Poisson distribution. So you see this distribution. So this looks like a normal distribution, but it is actually a Poisson's distribution because the spread is not that much. If you notice properly, the spread is much lower here because of the small world networks and the power node networks that we talked about. Key more number of nodes should have less number of uh, less degree, and the less number of nodes should have more degree. that is kind of what is being depicted here. So with your, if your number of nodes is higher, basically most nodes are averagely linked. So the higher nodes, if you see on this tail end, they will have uh, lower degree basically, and the lower number of nodes, the smaller number of nodes will have high degree, and the maximum of these nodes will be averagely linked. So this is what is depicted in the Poisson distribution that comes out from the binomial distribution of the ER network. And these ER graphs, importantly, do not have two important properties observed in many real world networks. First is they do not generate local clustering and triadic closures. So first thing is, what is triadic closures? Is the thing that we talked about. If A and B are sorry, if A is connected to both B and C, what is the probability that there is a strong tie between B and C? So that is kind of the triadic closure, the triangle formation or the triadic closure that we talked about. So that is not present in randomized ER networks, and also they do not account for the formation of hubs. Basically, the degree distribution uh, converges to a Poisson distribution rather than a real power law distribution. This is a Poisson distribution where most nodes are averagely linked, but in real world networks, your most nodes will have very low connectivity. So that is not basically reflected in this model. So in this model, there are these two are the major kind of discredits or the disadvantages of this model, but this is still a very good starting point that we have, so, to compare it against real life networks. Okay, this is another model, another randomized model. This also has been talked about a little in class. So basically, it is a random graph generation model that produces graphs with small world properties, including short average path lengths and high clustering. The issues that we were facing in EON network is kind of solved in this WS model. So it is basically known as the rewiring process. So it has two steps. First is you build a regular graph uh, having basically in which each vertex will have the same number of neighbors with degree k, and this kind of looks like a lattice. This is the regular network. So basically each node is connected with a degree k. So like it's an uniform or a regular graph. Now after you have completed this constructed this regular graph, with probability p, you have to rewire each edge xy in the network to a random node y prime. So instead of xy, you do xy prime, and y. And how do you choose this y prime? This y prime is chosen uniformly at random from all possible nodes. So basically, think of it as you have a distribution, you randomly pick a node from that distribution. So that will be your y prime. So you rewire the connection from xy to xy prime, and this y prime you choose at random from all possible nodes, and you have to keep two things in mind. One is you have to avoid self flukes. You cannot pick the same node from the distribution, and link duplication. Basically, if there's already a link between x and x and y prime, you cannot use link duplication. Basically, you cannot do a double link to that. So you need to avoid these things while doing the rewiring. But other than that, if you start from a regular graph and you do rewiring with some probability and you increase that probability, and with increasing probability increase sorry increasing probability increases some the randomness of the network. So the random networks look something like this, the regular network will look something like this. So basically you have to choose your sweet spot with the probabilistic value and the randomness of the rewiring, so that you can get somewhat closer to a small world or like a real life network that you see in real life. So I'm hoping you can see this graph. So here you can see. So this is a graph that is plotted. So your y-axis is basically LP, which is a global property that measures the typical separation between two vertices, and your x-axis is the clickishness or the clustering coefficient, also you can call, uh, of the different nodes of a typical neighborhood. So if you see at the point of p equal to say around point 0.1, these the basically path lengths of basically this LP is measuring your path length. The path length is relatively much shorter, which is exactly the characteristic of a real world network. But your clustering coefficient or clickishness is very high. So formation of hubs with uh, basically small path lengths. So that is kind of representation of how real life networks look like. So from ER networks, we've come to WS networks where we have solved that problem. Like we are not getting hubs, and our path lengths are not small as in real life networks. Those two problems we could solve with this WS model. I'll not go into the mathematics part because there's a lot of mathematics involved in this. So if you want, you can look it up. There are various sources of that. Like any graph theory book should be good for that. But yeah, this is what it is. Okay. So, um, just a second. Okay. So now we will move into some question solving. And before that, if anyone has anything to ask or anything to say, you may do so now. We'll take a quick 2-minute break and we'll start doing the questions after that. So, anyone has any questions till now? Okay, then. If no one has, we can move into the questions. Okay, so I'll show the questions on the screen for 2 to 3 minutes, depending on the type of the question. And I would like all of you to write the answers on the chat. And after that, we will discuss the answers uh, uh, on the slides as well. So this is the first question. Start doing it. Do write the answers in the chat. I'll be back in exactly 2 minutes. I'll take a break. Thank you, guys. Just keep doing it. Okay. Uh, okay. We have a couple of answers. So, yeah, all of you are correct. So yeah, betweenness centrality is a characteristic of the network, not a node, and it is a measure of the number of shortest paths passing through the network. So yeah, let's move on to the next one. By the way, these can be multiple answer correct. So like uh, these are not hard and fast one answer or like multiple answer correct. So it can be either. So it can be one answer correct as well. It can be multiple answer correct as well. So yeah, keep that in mind. Let's see. Do we have any answers? Okay. Uh, one and two, one, four, four. Okay. So yeah, first thing, first option, clustering coefficient cannot be any integer. Clustering coefficient can only lie between 0 and 1. So the first option is not correct. The second option, clustering coefficient of a node in a graph can be 0, can be 0. If there is no clicks at uh, like in around that node, so obviously the clustering coefficient of the node will be 0. So yeah, that is very true. And clustering coefficient of 1 shows the graph is complete. Yeah, a clustering coefficient of 1 means that all the connections that are possible between the nodes are there. That is what it means. So it means that the graph is complete. So yeah, that is also true. And clustering coefficient of a node signifies how clustered the rest of the nodes are in the network. It's not true, because if you want to know about how clustered the rest of the nodes are in the network, you have to do the find out the clustering coefficient of those nodes. You cannot infer it from one node and implement it on this. So yeah, option two and three are correct. So four was a like a misleading one, because it is saying the clustering coefficient of a node signifies how clustered the rest of the nodes are in the network. So it's not. Signifies how clustered it and its neighbors are, not the rest of the nodes. So these next 4 or 5 questions will be based on these graph photos. So I'll keep these on the screen and I'll move forward with each question. So this is the first question for this basically image. Give you 2 minutes. Okay, let's see if we have any answers. Four of you are saying graph 5. Okay, yeah, it's true. Graph 5 is the most connected component. So the total number of clicks here are much greater than the rest. So this is the not even connected. Yeah. This is the next question. Uh, just keep in mind it is asking among the given graphs how many nodes does the largest click contain, not which graph has the largest click. How many nodes does the largest click contain? Firstly, you have to identify which is the largest click. Let's see if we have any answers. Yeah, most of you are correct. It's basically this graph 2, having this A, B, C, D. This is the largest click present among all the graphs, and this has 4 nodes. So yeah, it's correct. Next. Let's see if you have any answers. Only one answer. We'll give you another minute. more answers. Okay, no more answers. But yeah, the answer given is correct. It's 0. So in graph 4, if you see, this is a disconnected component. So A, B, C, D, E is a disconnected component in itself, and F, G, H, I, J, K is a disconnected component in itself. Now, sorry, uh, inside C, the clustering coefficient, to calculate the clustering coefficient of C. So C here is connected to B and D. B and D are not connected to each other. So there is no click permission of, about the node C. So the clustering coefficient will be 0. So basically, if C is connected to B and D, B and D should be connected to each other to form a clique. It is not forming any clique. So it is, the clustering coefficient will be 0, basically. Okay. Uh, Moving on. This is something that I did not cover today, but this has been covered in the course, basically in the course videos. So I think you guys should be able to answer this because sir specifically covered this question in the course. So somebody is trying to enter. See if you have any answers. Only one answer, and that's correct. Actually, it's a straight line in logarithmic scale. Sir had covered this in his videos. So, yeah. Moving on. Next question. we have any answers. Any answers. Uh, the correct answer is all three are correct. So adjacency list and adjacency matrix has been taught to you. Uh, but incidence matrix is another kind of data structure that is used to represent graphs. So in incidence matrix, so you have a row for each vertex and a column for each basically edge. So it's a different type of representation, but it is also used to represent graphs. So answer is all three. Okay, moving on. Uh, I see if we have any answers. We have two answers. I'll give you another minute. Okay, the answer is basically three. I think one of you answered correctly. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, basically clustering coefficient is not a characteristic of a network. So first and foremost, that clustering coefficient you always measure with respect to a node. If you want to measure clustering coefficient of a network, what you do is you measure clustering coefficient of each node and you average them out. But in general, clustering coefficient only means for a node. So clustering coefficient is a characteristic of a node, and it is proportional to the number of neighbors of a node that are connected. So basically, uh, the neighbors of the particular node on which you are measuring the clustering coefficient, it measures if they are connected or not. So if you are measuring the clustering coefficient of A and A is connected to B and A is connected to C, clustering coefficient is measuring if B and C are connected or not. So yeah, proportion of neighbors of a node that are connected. So yeah, it is measuring that. Okay, moving on to the next one. Let's see if we have answers. The three different answers. I'll give you another minute. Okay, so the answer is characteristic path length. So obviously degree is a node property. Clustering coefficient, as I discussed with the previous question, it is a node property. Betweenness centrality also measures if a particular node is with between the shortest paths between two other nodes. So that also is a node property. The only node property that is not here is characteristic path length. So the characteristic path length is a property of the network. It's not a node property, but the rest three are node properties. So yeah, moving on to the next one. So this is the graph. We'll be discussing basically the next few questions will be based on this graph only. So I'll be showing the picture and image, and I'll be showing the questions down below. Please use it to solve the questions. Okay, let's see if we have any answers. Okay, I can see three answers. Yeah, the answer is correct. So 5 is connected to 2, 4, and 1. So the degree of 5 is C. Next question. This would require a little bit of time, so you need to. I'm sorry, someone is trying to enter. Uh, so for this question, you need to calculate uh, the clustering coefficient for each node, and then you need to average it across all, the 6 nodes in the network. So and round off the answer to the last two decimal points. I'll give you 2 minutes, a little bit more than that. You're going to require to calculate all that. Let's see, do we have any answers yet? We have two answers. We'll give another minute. Okay, here is the answer. So basically, you calculate the clustering coefficient for each node. So for node 1, you see it's connected to 2 and 5 and it is forming a tree. So basically, this is 1. The clustering coefficient for node 1 will be 1. For node 2, you see there are 3 connections and one of them have a click. So it's basically 1 by 3c2. It comes out to 2 by 3 into 3 minus 1. It's basically one third. For 3, it's connected to 4 and 2, not forming any cliques or edges between them. So the clustering coefficient for 3 will be 0. For 4, same thing, connected to 3 and 5, not no connection between 3 and 5. It's 0 as well. For 5, it's the same as 2. So it has 3 connections to 2, 1, and 4. And 2 and 1 are connected over itself. So basically 1 by 3c2, it's the same as one third. And for 6, it's again 0. I have not written down 6 here, but yeah, 6, it is only connected to 4, which is not forming anything. So the average clustering coefficient will be like 1 plus one third plus one third, rest of them are 0, divided by 6. It comes to 5 by 18. It's around 0.27 or 0.28. So I saw 1.27 answer. So that's correct. Moving on. Next one. Diameter of this network. Also, when you are writing the diameter as the answer, also like state which is the longest path, this is longest shortest path, from which node to which node you are calculating. That also please enter in the chat. Okay, let's see if we have any answers. see two answers. Sorry, Ritvik, what is between six and half? I'm not
No,
getting it.
I mean, I meant between 6 and node 1 and between 6 and node 2.
Oh, okay, okay,
Like,
okay. Acha, 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 acha. I got it, got it, got it.
okay.
Okay. Yeah, actually, that's the correct answer only. So basically, three. You can either go from one to six. So one, five, four, six. This is a three path length of three. Similarly, with two to six, two, three, four, six. That's also a path length of three. So either of them. Yeah, correct. Yeah. Let's move on to the next one. Yeah, I think this is the last question for today. I'll give you a couple of minutes to. Just a second, someone is trying to. Let's see if we have any answers. If you only have one, we'll wait for a couple of minutes more. answers, but yours is correct, Ritvik. So this is the basically the format. So if E is your expected number of edges and P is the probability of the connection, and basically these are the total number of possible connections. This is NC2. So probability times the total number of possible connections should be the expected number of edges. So that is what I've done here. So your probability P here is zero point 0.4 and N is given as 100. So just substitute these values. So P is zero point 0.4, N is 100, and you simplify that. Your answer comes out to be 98. And yeah, this is it. So that's all for today. I hope you liked the lecture and the problem solving. Uh, we will meet again here next Tuesday, same time, 6 p.m. And yeah, I gave you guys my email ID last time. So if you have guys have any issue or you want to connect, just like write an email through the email ID, keeping the name of this course as the basically the subject, so that it's easy for me to spot. And yeah, we will meet again next week. So I'll close the session here. Thank you everyone for joining. See you next week.
Thank you.